Everybody. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jenny Robb, and I'm the head curator for comics and cartoon art at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum at The Ohio State University. And I'm president of the Research Librarians cohort of the Comic Studies Society. And we are gathered today for our forum on collection development policies. And I'll just mention sort of what the whole agenda is. We're going to be talking about collection development policies with our presenters for about 45 minutes. Is that fair to say? Presenters? Shaking heads? Okay. And then we're going to have some special guests who I'm going to introduce, Kendra and Ryan Leibowitz from the Golden Apple Comic and Art Foundation, who wanted to come and talk with the group about what their foundation is doing and how they might collaborate or partner with some of us. And then I'll be doing some announcements having to do with the chapter. So if all the members can please stay to the end, that would be great. We'll be talking about the conference, the Comic Studies Society conference this summer, as well as some discussion about our bylaws and some possible changes to the bylaws. So very exciting stuff that I know you all will want to stay for. But let's go ahead and get started with our presenters. We have Jason Larsen, who's the Comic Studies Librarian at the Stephen O. Murray and Keelung Hong Special Collections at Michigan State University Libraries. We have Mara Thacker, who's the South Asian Studies and Global Popular Culture Librarian and Associate Professor at the University of Illinois. And Brian Flota, who's the Humanities Librarian and a comic book donor to James Madison University. So I will turn it over to whichever of you is going to start.
Well, it was going to be Brian. I'm not sure how much and if he wants to add anything on the title slide here, because you've very deftly introduced us. So unless he objects, I will turn it over to, I'll advance and let Jason tell you what our plan is for the presentation.
Go for it.
Jason, yeah.
I'm muted. So sorry about that. So really, these are just guideposts to the discussion. We just kind of want to give everyone kind of like a rough outline of what we're doing and where we're going, so everyone can kind of follow along. Initially, we're going to talk about really overall broad strokes. This is a really deep topic that takes a lot of time, but so this is really meant just to kind of give you an overall view. Then we're also going to do 3 case studies, which is each of our institutions and kind of what we have done to assist with collection development policy building. And then we'll talk about some research findings about sustainability that tie into the discussion of collection development. And then we'll kind of basically at that point open it up for a floor of discussion, and we'll take questions from everybody. So with that, I will turn it back over to Mara.
Yeah, so this is Mara Thacker speaking. We have an image on the slide of the amazing Spider-Man wedding, because we're going to talk about rules of engagement here, but not in that sense. What we're hoping for is a really rich collaborative discussion. We want to hear from you all. So just so you all understand how you should be interacting throughout, questions and comments are welcomed at any time, even before the formal discussion at the end, which we hope is not just Brian, Jason, and I talking to each other. So you can put the questions or comments into the chat, which we will be monitoring, or you can raise your hand using the little raise hand function in Zoom, and we will call on you. And then otherwise, which everyone's already excelling at, please remain on mute unless we call on you. And now Brian.
Hi, this is Brian Flota speaking. So over the course of this presentation, we're going to present 3 case studies that represent sort of a spectrum of collection development policies as it relates to comics collections in either academic or other libraries. For many institutions, comics are subsumed under a larger general or disciplinary collection policy. Good collection policies have guideposts for where we've been, where we are going, and where we are at present. Elements of good policy can include collection history, the description and scope of the collection, circulation policies, donation policies, and any association or any associated memorandums of understanding or agreements. These policies may guide internal decision making, but they may also be viewed as a communication tool for users and external stakeholders. And lastly, collection development policies lead to responsible and sustainable collecting. All right, next to Jason.
Sorry, auto muted me. So this is Jason Larsen speaking. And so really what we wanted to do with these case studies is kind of give you a little bit about each institution, who we are, what our focuses are, and kind of essentially what our distinctive focuses have been to build a collection policy, or what we do to do so. So my job title is Comic Studies Librarian, as I was introduced. And so I have a specific job title related to comics, which isn't always the case. And so it makes it a little easier, though, to be comics focused when I develop a policy, because I have a clearly defined role in comics with a specific collection. So the collection in Michigan State's case, as many people know, started out in 1970. If you didn't know, it started in 1970 with 6,000 comic books. And that basically began a seeding effort that has grown quite a bit in the last 50 years plus since then. We are a Carnegie R1 classification, so the university is a very high research activity. So our focus at Michigan State is primarily intentionally meant for research, but we also do instruction, obviously. We do not have a comic studies program, but we do have a comics minor in graphic art comic art and graphic novels. So even though we don't have a specific dedicated program, we still do cross-disciplinary use them. I've used them in political science classes. I've used the comics in very, very, very a variety of classes, from arts and literature, even to some science at this point. So size of the collection at Michigan State, we're currently approximately 350,000. And again, it's primarily a research collection. It is part of a special collection, though. And so again, depending on your institution, a special collection in our case means they do not circulate, which means they're not open to the public. The public cannot peruse the stacks. And it basically means they never leave our special reading room. So they're really not meant for leisure. They're more meant for strictly academic or research purposes. Our distinct collection, there's many pieces to it, but primarily the areas of distinction at this point, it's made up of serialized comics and monographics from North America and Europe. And it contains comics, though, across the globe, even from places like North Korea. So it's just a really large, for lack of a better word, impressively large comic collection with a lot of different geographic locations contained in it. And it also does contain numerous comic strips, as well as a set of proof sheets from King Features. And so those are some of the highlight distinctions. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide here. So when dealing with collection development at an institution this large, best practices. And the first is that I've come through experiences, know your library and institution. What I mean by that is understand who you are and who you serve, because that really will help inform how you want to build a policy. I use a lot of local, state, and national resource tools to help me with that. There's a lot of them out there, and we'll kind of talk about that towards the end of where you can find these. But through those tools and data pieces, you understand your student population and who basically is your demographic of students. You might have some that go in more in the non-traditional route, where they're older students in their late 20s or even early 30s. You can have some that are all basically between 18 and 24 and be the majority of your students. That may not seem like it matters, but it does when you're building a policy that's inclusive, and also is something that will be aligning to your goals, which is the last point of understanding your knowledge or your library and your institution. It's be mindful of your unit and library goals. Those are still fundamentals that are important, even though all these other things about understanding who you serve is important. It also is important to understand your university and library's guidelines of what you're trying to achieve. This one's a little unusual, and I found this all to be very helpful, though. Do a SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis. It seems very, very business-like, but separating the business component and capitalist component, it's still a really great tool to help you understand things about yourself, especially if you've done the initial demographic homework. Knowing yourself basically means you have all the facets of who you are in front of you. And when you do an analysis of that, you'll be able to actually understand where your strengths will lie and where your weaknesses are, and where you may want to address those, and where you can lean into your strengths. And this is one of those exercises that's tough, because you need to be willing to honestly look at yourself and say, well, what am I not great at, or not doing well, or shouldn't be doing? And what should I be doing well at, and what I am? It's not always a pleasant internal conversation to have, but it's an important one, because it also helps you build a better collection that's sustainable in the long term, which is the point of a policy. There's many facets like we talked about, but this is a really key one to help you with that. And the last one, it sounds a little goofy, and I know it's not meant to be, but peer institution review. And that's basically what I mean is benchmarking. And what I mean by that statement is benchmarking is when you look at other peer institutions and say, here's where they have built their policies, here's what they are doing. And what do I like about that I can incorporate into my policies or my practices. But do not compare yourself. Comparisons aren't actually a healthy thing because everyone's got a different institution. Some can be, for example, like you'll see later on, aren't R1s. So you really can't compare yourself to say, well, I want to achieve what an R1's doing when that's not who your institution is. So while it's important to benchmark and it's a healthy activity to look at your peers, it's not good to compare yourself. And so with that, I'm going to kind of pass it, at this point, I'll pass it over to Mara to talk about University of Illinois.
Sorry, I advanced a little early. I wasn't trying to rush you. As was said before, I'm the South Asian Studies and Global Popular Culture Librarian. I actually started as just a South Asian Studies librarian, and related to the history of the collection being somewhat complicated, the University of Illinois has been collecting comics and graphic novels for at least a quarter of a century, which I guess is only 25 years or so. But I was collaborating with the undergraduate library and librarians at the time and added South Asian comics as part of a collaborative collection agreement. And so what had been initially a collection that was meant for leisure reading for students kind of ended up developing this area of specialization that ended up being sort of important and filling in gaps in the national collection. So that may explain some of the oddities of our statement as it goes on. So the undergraduate library was opened in 1949 with a purpose of serving undergrads, but our library is undergoing a lot of big changes, including a building project. And so we no longer have an undergraduate library. And by dint of my work with South Asian comics and a couple other reasons and having this global popular culture title appended, I ended up sort of inheriting or taking over all of the comics, or for the most part. There are some other folks who do some things. We're a very collaborative institution, but that ended up coming under my purview. We don't have a formal comic studies program, but we do, of course, have coursework available and some comic studies scholars. Many of you, for example, have probably read the research or attended a talk by Dr. Carol Tilley through our iSchool. So we do have people doing important work in the area. The size of the collection and purpose, as it stands right now, we're at approximately 35,000 comics. For both research and leisure reading purposes. Most of the collection is circulating and available for interlibrary loan. And this includes our rare pieces that are in our offsite storage facility. One of the sort of caveats of being part of a South Asian cooperative program is a commitment to lending our materials. So we have a very special override in place where people can borrow some of our materials, even if they're rare. Our areas of distinction, apart from South Asia, is crowdfunded comics. And we have the Scott Walter collection, which I'll expand a little on later. So one of the things that was challenging once I took over the comics and became the sort of popular culture person is we didn't have a collection statement at all. And for various reasons, including not having one, I wrote one in June 2023, but I was somewhat limited because we have our collection statements listed on the library website. And despite the fact that most of them haven't been updated in a decade or more, there is a specific sort of template or formula we have to use. So I have listed out the sections that if you were to go through all of the University of Illinois collection statements, they would all have these pieces. It starts with kind of a summary statement, and then there's the collection description. And you have to have the purpose, the history of the collection, an estimate of the holdings, state, regional, and national importance, the person responsible for collecting, the location of the materials, and citations of works describing the collection. So like in the case of our comic collection, Jason and I co-authored a piece on the crowdfunded comic collection because Jason was really instrumental in getting that project off the ground. So that work describes the collection and is included in our collection statement. The next section is the collection guidelines. So we have languages, chronological guidelines, geographical, type of subject, types of materials, dates and places of publication. And then we have a really funky area that's collection responsibility by subject, subdivisions with qualifications, levels of collecting intensity and assignment. So we have this table, and some of what that gets at is that we're a huge, huge library, and there could be overlapping sort of responsibilities for collecting. So, for example, graphic medicine might be collected by whoever is doing applied health, and so that might be reflected in that table. Well, it is. And then there were specific call outs to some of the materials that require a little more focus or get a little larger piece of the funding pie. So comics and graphic novels, tabletop games, and video games. And the photo here is some of the items from the South Asian comic collection, just a selection of titles to show you some of the range. And so since we're talking about comics here, I did want to share the special statement around comics, which is comics and graphic novels are the focus of the collection, meaning that's the biggest part of global pop culture, comprising more than 30,000 holdings in nearly 50 languages. While more than half of the collection is in the English language, there are large collections in Hindi, Bengali, Chinese, Japanese, French, Spanish, and Tamil. The comics and graphic novel collection at Illinois represents the largest collection of South Asian comics in a research library with more than 6,700 holdings. Other highlights from the collection include the Scott Walter collection, which comprises more than 8,000 single-issue Marvel comics, and the crowdfunded comic collection, which highlights marginalized creators and rarely held materials. And then we also have where the items are located and a little bit of a note about format, and that we also get some of the things pertaining to aboutness. So now Brian will talk about the case at JMU.
Hi, unmute myself. It's Brian Flota speaking. At JMU, we have a much more meager library collection in either Michigan State or Illinois. So in my role, I'm Humanities Librarian. The comics that are sort of the traditional floppy style comics are housed in special collections. So I have to work with them on acquiring sort of special items. When it comes to graphic novels that we have in our circulating collection, I can order those, and so can any of our liaison librarians that have access to the funds to purchase books. The graphic novel collection started in the late aughts, early teens. It was spearheaded by colleague Jody Fagan, who actually produced a monograph about developing graphic novels for an academic library, because at the time that was just starting to pick up, probably following public libraries by about 10 or 15 years. In 2015, I donated approximately 1,900 comic books to James Madison University. The following year, my father passed away, and he had about 4 times as many comics as I did, and I ended up donating those as well. So there ended up being about 10,000 single-issue comics that were in that donation, and they are currently, I guess you would say, in the areas of distinction under the Bradley and Brian Flota comic book collection. Because of interest in that, we subsequently have been purchasing and acquiring more comics. Another thing that's worth noting is that when the donation was made, we were just sort of a doctoral and professional university, but in 2022, we actually shifted to R2. This is also coinciding with a major library renovation. So despite the move to R2, we're kind of slow in the acquisition of new comics at this point, but other purchases had been made between 2016 and say 2023. We do not have a comic studies program. However, usually somewhere between 3 and 5 classes across the university are taught with a comics focus per semester. And we do have a book arts minor, which occasionally focuses on comics or comics related work. When it comes to the graphic novels, I think we're in the thousands there. When it comes to the single issue comics, we're at about 12,500. So about 2,500 have been added since that the initial donation back in 2015 and 2016. Since then, a major focus has been on developing a Black comic book collection. So define this as comics featuring Black fictional or non-fictional subjects and or Black creators or publishers. And we have about 1,500 comics across the ones I donated and ones that we've purchased since that sort of fit within these criteria. If you look at the picture on the right, that's a nice little show-off picture of our copies of Fantastic Four number 52, the first appearance of Black Panther, and Hero for Hire number 1, the first appearance of Luke Cage. Next slide, thanks. Unlike Illinois and Michigan, our collection development policy is a more general special collections policy. And the policy as it relates to the comics is pretty broad and actually somewhat kind of vague. The main focus of JMU Special Collections is Central Shenandoah Valley history. So that's here, Harrisonburg, Virginia, the county that we are in, Rockingham County, or the Shenandoah Valley and other counties that are nearby. Also, to document the history of James Madison University. We are not the depository of records, so this is often sort of gifts from clubs or various administrative bodies from on campus, and we collect that material. Outside of those sort of two major collecting areas, you will see language in here about support the use of primary source materials that sort of support JMU curriculum and a wider community of scholars. So within that, JMU Special Collections has developed specialties in not only comic books, but also pulp magazines, artist books, some children's literature, and a few other sort of areas, and more recently, Black poetry and fiction. But those are actually not codified in the collection development policy at this point. And I believe that is something that is in the works. So right now, we don't have the kind of robust and sort of very what's the word I'm looking for? We don't have SWOT analysis. We don't have that kind of approach to our collection as it relates to comics at this point. But I believe, especially over this period while we're going through our renovation, we'll be focusing a bit more on making sure that those collection development policies get updated and somehow provide the comics piece.
So this is Jason speaking again. And so we've kind of gone through each case study of each of unique institutional needs. And also, like, I noticed that you'll see there were several copies of everyone's policies, or at least a piece of it. Mine is in the works because mine is apparently it's season. We're all under construction. We actually have a large project here at Michigan State underway to move the entire special collections unit, which the comics are a part of. And so we're kind of reworking all our collection development statements at the same time. So it's kind of a unit lift. So I don't have anything to share yet because it's still being revised, reviewed, and all the things that go with that. But the work is still the same. So it was very valuable to discuss kind of the work that was done. But we also want to talk about the resources that I used to kind of get there. I kind of left a gap for anyone else who wanted in the chat here or the group here to put it on. So I apologize, it looks a little blank. Local state education sources are really important, actually, to try to understand the library, know yourself, the librarian, know your library. Really, for example, every state has an education office that coordinates this. Illinois has one, Ohio has one. The one I gave is the example for Michigan. You can get a lot of good data from your own local state collection agencies because, and again, data is just a starting point. It's not I do not look at data as it tells me what to do. Data gives me the foundational information to say, I have the basis. Now I have to make my own decisions based on the other things that are relevant to the policy. But really, that's a great website that gives me matriculation up to the university. It tells me how many kids come up to Michigan State from the state itself, how many are out of state. So it's really important data that gives you an idea of who your students are and what who your university services. The National Center for Educational Statistics is really good because they have a College Navigator site that takes you to every university in college in the United States and says, tell me about this institution. And it gives you a large variety of data about your academic institutions, including your enrollment, your graduation rate. It's almost like another layer based on post-secondary, which is the world we all service as post-secondary education. So it's a good starting point to say, I understand more about my students and my library and my basically other things about my institution, because it gives you a really broad look at that. And last is really the US Census data, which sounds again a little deep into the data, but it's really not. It's only a surface layer. There's a lot of good dashboard reports you can use to say, tell me about my state's demographics, including their age and things like that. So these are just meant to be a couple of quick resources for if you're digging into a policy or you want to know even just more about your institution, regardless of a collection development. All these things can help you with sustainability planning, even if it's not collection development policy. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it back over to Mara.
Yeah, and Jason, I did not add, we have a data dashboard for the University of Illinois that I sometimes look at for composition of the student body. Wasn't sure how fascinating or applicable that would be elsewhere, but we appreciate you pulling together some sources. Okay, so Jason, Brian, and I worked together on a research project, which many of you or some of you may have heard us. We presented on it briefly at the Comic Studies Society conference last year. We are hopeful that it will one day be published so you can read the full thing. But in the meantime, we wanted to take the advantage of having access to that data that we gathered and share a little bit as it relates to collection statements. So we conducted a survey in January 2023 of academic libraries that collect comics. And although we didn't ask the very obvious yes/no question of whether there is a specific comics collection development policy, a lot of the data we collected is nevertheless very revealing on this issue. So we received 19 responses, which did not include our own institution. So we just included ourselves and all that previous content. And we saw a range of approaches to comics collection in terms of sizes, policies, areas of distinction, and importantly, measures taken for preservation and sustainability. So one thing we asked about was the purpose of the collection. We asked whether they were integrated within general collections or if comics had their own designated location, whether they distinguish between leisure reading and browsing or comics for research and special collections, and whether the collection was circulating, non-circulating, or both. So of the 19 institutions represented, only 4 reported that they distinguished between comics for leisure reading and comics for research. Given that the majority of the collections report serving both of these purposes, it's interesting that 8 institutions reported that their collections are strictly non-circulating, meaning that it's, you know, a little bit harder to understand that if it's for leisure reading and presumably but I have heard various reasons for this, and I'm sure we can talk about that more in discussion. Of the remaining institutions, 4 institutions circulate the entirety of their comics collections and 7 report having a mixture of both. So there is no clear relationship between the 4 institutions that distinguished the purpose of their collections and their circulation policies. So these things seem wildly unrelated to each other. We also asked about areas of focus. So we asked about distinctive or noteworthy areas within the comics collection. So after coding the data, we ended up with 32 unique codes for areas of focus. Of these, 8 of them related to specific identity markers, such as gender, race, or ethnicity. And 1 code was kind of a general stand-in for DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So notably, only 1 institution out of the 19 specifically named manga. And we suspect that's because we said areas of distinction. We know that a lot of places do collect manga. On the other hand, 5 institutions explicitly mentioned collecting Marvel or DC comics, making the 2 comics industry publishing behemoths the most common of the reported areas of focus. Other noteworthy findings include that only 4 institutions reported collecting monographic comics, and only 1 institution claimed to collect serialized comics. Again, we know this is probably not true. It was probably a little bit of a misunderstanding of the question, but it was very interesting. The other noteworthy things, respondents with collections that began in the last 15 years, so people who are newer to the game, typically lack a collection development policy. We had also asked respondents about any sustainability measures that they had taken to kind of preserve and sustain the collections. And the most commonly cited reason that people did not take any sustainability measures is it was not relevant to their collection development policy. Or there were staffing issues was the other common one, but that is something to sit on and chew on as we think about how a collection development policy might be used in relation to sustaining collections. So before we get into the discussion, I do want to do a quick plug for the Research Librarians Cohort Notable Collections Initiative. So we have a working group that many of you should be aware of. Some of you may have volunteered for, but one thing we hope you're taking away is that collection statements can be a useful tool for communicating not just what you have, but how people may or may not access it, what you can accept in a donation. So if we don't proactively communicate with each other and everyone else about what we hold, we may be holding ourselves back from more effective collaboration and preventing scholars from accessing things that they need for their research. We're modeling ourselves after the Notable Japanese Collections Project, and I'll put the link in the chat after I stop sharing my screen. But we want to build a similar database for comic studies. So we have a form that has been designed. We need to finalize it. It's in the kind of final stages of production, but at some point in the near future, somebody from that working group will probably reach out to you all and ask you to input your collections. And this is me asking as nicely and charmingly as I can to please participate in that project so we can build this database. So now we'll have our discussion. Remember, we want you to ask questions. We want you to respond to us. You can raise your hand and unmute, or you can put it in chat, and I am going to stop sharing and pop that link as promised. And I see there were some things in chat, and I don't know if there are questions yet, so let's check. Okay. Oh, all right. We have some links to some collection development policies, so that should be fun to look at. And just to kick us off while you take your time to think of questions, I'll pose a question to my co-presenters, which is, how have you actually used your collection development policy? Do you have any examples of, like, you had something and it came to a point of decision and your policy ended up helping you make that decision?
I can go ahead unless Brian, you unmuted at the same time, so I could let you go first.
I would say that as it relates to comics, no. I've typically been pretty good when I've recommended something for purchase. Special collections has been like, cool. And haven't had to really work the policy to make key acquisitions. This has happened in other areas outside of comic studies, but not as it relates to comics.
I think for me, it's been more of when we get requests for donations, it's using what has been shaped historically and also what we're working towards to understand this is something we already have a lot of because it's part of the policies to tell you what's your area of focus. Well, I already have a ginormous focus in. I'll give an example of easily like 1990s comics. Like we will get requests now and again. It's like, hey, I have like a bunch of 1990s comics. We probably have here at this collection pretty much almost everything. I'm sure there's always gaps, right? But critical mass of the 1990s era, I have a very large swath of it. And unless it's really something specific that they can point out, it really and it's also where your collection policy can have your donation policy as part of it. I think I haven't had a chance to look at all the neat links that just popped in there. I'm really curious to see if people have integrated those. Some do, some don't. From when I benchmarked against a lot of institutions who are equivalent size, that policy out there helps also, as we talked about earlier, it's a communicative tool to say, if it's visible, you can see it and say, hey, these are the things we're really looking for if you want to donate, or if you want to donate, here's the things to help us help you, which usually a lot of it's a list, or we're looking for these areas. And that's how I've used it to really kind of help direct the flow of, hey, that doesn't really, I really can't take 6,000 1990s comics because we probably would have a large swath, or they don't really know what they have. And we try to politely ask for things. And I think we're all the librarians in this group can probably agree. We try to ask for more information to help us, not to make it harder for the donor. But the better information we have, the better decisions that can be made. So that's kind of how I've used mine just in the last year. So it's just using it against as a guidepost of what is good and what's not.
And I will say, from the donor's perspective, before I donated the collection to JMU, I was going to donate it to my alma mater, UC Riverside, which has the Eaton collection. And so I sent them a list of what I had. And because they have a fairly robust collection, they looked at the list and said, well, we've got most of this stuff, but I think there were about 400 comics that they did not have, which I did end up donating. So there was an instance where I'm pretty sure, again, don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure they had a pretty firm collection development policy as it relates to donations. And they are also focused on specifically, comics related to science fiction. So if I had any funny animal books or like rock and roll comics, or like stuff that falls outside of the superhero or science fiction milieu, they didn't want it for their collection. So they had very clear sort of guidelines about what they wanted and needed in their collection.
Okay, good. Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add that so we have used our collection development policy as a way to justify to our organization, what it is we're acquiring. And I don't know if any of you are aware of a report that is called Total Cost of Stewardship, put out by OCLC and I can't remember who all was involved in that, but they were really encouraging organizations, libraries, to look at the total cost of what's involved in stewardship of these materials. So, it's not about just getting them to your location, as we all know. It's about the hours of cataloging and housing and insurance and just space to put these. So, encouraging people to look at what are our priorities, because we're obviously not going to be able to collect everything. So our organization really wanted us to say, like, this is specifically what we're going to prioritize with our limited resources. And what does that mean? That means that there are other things that we are not going to collect. And that's really can be very hard to do, especially when somebody calls up with something really great and you think, oh, that's so cool, like I want to take that, but maybe it's not in your priority, and maybe you have to say no so that you can focus on what's in your priorities. So we've used the collection development policy to kind of say, hey, we want to take this big collection, and this is how it fits into our stated collection priorities, that we do want to put the resources towards that. So I think that's an important aspect. I would also encourage everybody, if you're making a policy, to write in there what you do with duplicates, particularly when you're dealing with pop culture like comic books. We collect a lot of original art, and so that no original art is a duplicate, right? But comic books, magazines, journals, all that, what do we do with those? And so that's, in our part of our collection development policy, is to state what we do with duplicates. And we also make arrangements with donors to return any duplicates as well, if they prefer that.
I mean, this is just another plug for the working group and putting in your collections, because we've seen how our whisper networks work when someone gets offered a donation and then they send it to 3 people that they know that are interested in comics, but it may not fit. If we know what each other's specialties are, we can target who we push those donors towards. Okay, Pamela, and then we have a question in the chat after that.
So at San Diego State, the only thing that y'all haven't mentioned that I've used our collection development policy for is explaining to a donor who wants compensation for their collection, because we're not able to do that a lot. And so it's written into policy, like, here's the things that we typically would buy, and here's the things that we would take as a gift in kind. And then, you know, people can get upset. So I like to point them back to the policy and say, we don't typically buy this kind of stuff.
So Matthew has a question about how are we balancing specificity versus flexibility? After all, these policies can be difficult to amend quickly if the environment changes, and it always does. And I don't have a good genius specific answer myself over here. I mean, again, it's the balance between describing what you currently have, and I also use it as a bit of an aspiration. So I can think, for example, with the South Asian comic collection, at first we were specifically getting comics for India because that's where we had access, and we were getting them in English and Hindi and other languages that we had established vendors. But I made sure to include a sentence in there that there was a hope that the collection would expand to other countries and languages in the future. So I try to leave some wiggle room and some room for aspiration. But I think it would depend on the institution too, because as the subject specialist, I guess I could change my statement whenever I want. And so that was one of our questions, is who's responsible for writing the statement? Is there a policy? And some of us were talking before this event about how we had created it and then asked it to be sent places, and then it ended up in some sort of ether to nowhere. So I think it depends, you know, if you have to get them approved by committee or something, but at least in my case, my statement is what I say that it is, and I can change that now if I wanted. I don't know, Jason and Brian or anyone else, if you have some more insight on this question. It's a really good one.
I don't know. I think the one good thing about our policy is that it's so open-ended that it really does invite a lot of flexibility. So since the sort of initial donation, we've received at least or applied for 3 grants to do sort of collection development, and we've been able to sort of use a variety of means to sort of acquire these comics, and whether it's like using online auction sites or like in-person auction sites, or even relationships with a local comic book store, or working specifically with comic book vendors who deal with older, you know, golden age comics. We've had some flexibility. It's also a challenge because the vendor rules change constantly, and since we're a state institution, sometimes you can work with certain vendors and all of a sudden you're cut off, so then you have to adapt. A lot of vendors don't like the fact that they have to sign an extra tax form saying that we don't have to pay taxes because we are a state institution, and there's just a lot of stuff that can be really restrictive if it is an ultra specific policy. So having a certain amount of flexibility, like supports the curriculum, can be handy. I mean, we are not like flush with cash over here, but when the money does present itself and the opportunity presents itself, that flexibility, I think, has been a plus.
And I don't think I can really add much to that. I think and Matthew, feel free to unmute if I'm wrong. Are you talking about specificity in the sense of like usefulness, but also allowing future changes like growth or opportunities? I know your environment question is kind of clear. To answer that part, we kind of have set a review policy now every couple of years at the most before we would go back and look. And obviously circumstances in the comics medium are very different. There's a lot of things going on that can maybe dictate a change, but specificity to me when we're writing what I'm writing is the essential guideposts. And that's kind of what this whole discussion is about, is right. You can't bullet out every scenario and every quantifiable scenario you could encounter. These are meant to be your guiding principles, but they're not meant to be law, if that makes any sense. They're not meant to say you must do this. It's here's what we speak to, and here's what we believe, and here's how we're going to try to manage to that. That still gives you that flexibility, though, because you haven't said every single scenario, because some things do break the norm, and you have to have that ability, that professional judgment. So if that's not what you're looking for, then feel free to chime in. But that's how we address it here anyway. And I think everyone else has hit those marks for the most part, I think, of what you were looking for.
Andrew?
Yeah, so Andrew Lipper here at UC Riverside, and we just did a bunch of rewriting of collection development policies for various different parts of our collections. And speaking to the specificity versus flexibility, we left ourselves a lot of room for going forward in acquisitions and for that sort of changeability as things develop going forward. But we were much more specific in what we don't want to collect, like specific formats that we don't want or specific subject matters that we don't want. So maybe that's a good way to think about where to be flexible and where to be specific, right? It's much easier to think about the things that you don't want to have to deal with.
Absolutely true. I saw Michael's hand go up and then Jenny, and then we may have to wrap up in a little bit for our special guests. Michael?
Yeah, we don't have a written collection development policy, but I have something in my head that I use with approach, particularly for gifts. And our focus mirrors our special collection written policy focus, which is a focus not as much on research, all the research happens with the collection, but with curricular use. So for example, I have someone who's got a large collection of more cartoon-oriented collections, and he's giving a list, and when we get it, we'll sit down with the faculty teaching comics courses to see what of these would you find useful for your classes. And those would be what we would accept, and we wouldn't accept anything else. We're not building a general collection where it's very much focused on what serves the comic studies program in the course base. And the program is very much practically oriented. It's from people that are aspiring professionals in there because the internship opportunities and things like that. So it's not kind of scholarly focused, it's more practitioner focused.
Sorry, that's really interesting because I was wondering about that, how if collections are really looking at things from a curriculum perspective, what's being used in classes. And it's challenging because that changes, depending on professors that are there and which classes are being taught so rapidly. We had Professor Frederick Aldama was at Ohio State. He's a specialist in Latinx comics, and we were building the collection to help him with his teaching, and then he got stolen away by the University of Texas at Austin. So, but we still have this focus in our collection because we started it really with him. But I was also going to say that at the very end of our collection development policy, which I put the link on chat, we have this statement: should a unique acquisition opportunity present itself that is not covered by this policy, the acquisitions committee can conduct an ad hoc review. So we've kind of, said there that, like, boy, if something unique comes up that we really just did not account for, we can have a special review and make a decision on that.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm sorry we didn't have as much discussion time. I guess we're all more full of words than we thought we were even, but hopefully there'll be more venues to have more freewheeling discussion. And so I guess it's back to Jenny and the rest of our program today. Yeah,
so here's Jenny again. And I would encourage everybody, we have this great Comic Studies Society Mobilize platform. If you have questions or you want to share your policy or anything about this topic or any other, I'd love to see more conversation and discussion happening on that. I know it's like another place to check, but it could be really useful. We used to have like a listserv and emails would go out to everybody and you would see it in your email inbox, but this is what we're doing now, but would love to see conversation happening there. So please consider, if you have any ideas or questions that come up, throw them in that group, and we can try to get some conversation going there. Okay, so I'd like to introduce some special guests, and I think they are here. I mentioned at the top of the hour, Kendra and Ryan Leibowitz, who are from the Golden Apple Comic and Art Foundation. And there's Kendra.
We're here.
We are. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Jenny. I just don't know why we can't see ourselves. Maybe there's some feature that's
Do you have
our
your
video isn't working. We've tried a few different phones.
are you on a phone?
We are.
Unfortunately, we had some, we truly are working people. We had a couple employees call out sick today, so we had to rush in, and that's why we just had to do it on our phones.
We listened to all 45 minutes on the drive-in from busy Los Angeles, traffic. So,
Well, I'll tell you what,
love to be able to see you.
Yeah, we
Could
don't have to see you. If you all want to just go ahead and introduce the foundation and what it is you're doing, go right ahead.
All right, so I guess on a phone you can't do the video content of it. Sorry about that, everybody. So I'm Ryan Leibowitz, and this is my wife Kendra Leibowitz, and we are from the Golden Apple Comic and Art Foundation. Can everybody hear us okay?
Yes.
I see a lot of nodding, so I can see you. You can't see me. This is fun. If you could see us, you would see these amazing comic books behind us, as we are coming live from our shop here in Los Angeles, California, called Golden Apple Comics. You guys might have heard of this shop. My family started it in 1979. We've been in business. This is our 45th year in business selling comic books. It's just been an amazing ride. I just turned 50 this year, so basically my whole life has been in and around the comic book industry. I've had the pleasure of meeting everybody of note and not of note. My dad used to say the great and the near great. So the Stan Lees and Jack Kirby's were very relevant in our world, and we knew them very well, and people like that, and everybody in between. And a few years ago, my wife and I, wanted to give back to the industry. We were always trying to figure out what to do. And one of our customers, longtime customers, has amassed a giant collection. As you guys all know how this goes about. Collectors come in every week. They're weekly Wednesday warriors, and they get their comic books. And he amassed, several hundred long boxes of comic books over the years in his private collection. And he always said he was going to donate it to his alma mater, which is the University of Pennsylvania. And we said, oh, that's interesting. How are you going to do that? And he came to us and said, well, what if you started a foundation to help me place it there, because it actually was in zero order. It wasn't bagged and boarded. It wasn't cataloged. It wasn't kept correctly. So we actually spent a very long time, almost 2 years, well over a year, doing exactly all those things. And we're proud to say that as of today, 5 pallets of books have reached safely to the University of Pennsylvania. And so Kendra can explain a little bit more about how we took that initial donation and kind of forged an entire mission out of it.
Yeah. So our mission is to preserve, safeguard, and showcase comics and original art for generations to enjoy. Much like how you guys do it at your libraries, where you are, preserving, safeguarding, and showcasing all these amazing comics and original art. We want to do that as well. What Mara was saying about the database, that's one of our big things, is we wanted to create a database because we're literally having to cold call people. We cold call a ton of people in California. I maybe not called, but emailed. I cold emailed a lot of people, and
people in special collections, just like yourself.
Yeah. And then Brian, you were saying something about the University of Riverside. I've already spoken with them, and so I've called all over the place. So it's been a really great initiative for us, and to be able to give back. But now we're getting, the first collection was going just to Pennsylvania. That's where the donor wanted it to go, and that's what we made happen. But now, since we've been doing this for almost, 2.5 years, we are getting people coming out saying, hey, I want my collection placed at a university. I want this. And so then, we're having a hard time trying to figure out, okay, where do we place all these? And that's why, thank you so much for having us, Jenny. This is so great to connect with all of you, because we want to help you as much as we possibly can. And it's great to know, like, when we get, right now we just got a collection of pulp magazines.
One of the best
science
collections
fiction.
of pulp science fiction magazines that date back to the turn of the century. It was from a collection of one of the guys who was involved with WesterCon, which predates Comic Con. And he was one of the founders, and he was also an artist himself. His name is Dennis Neal Smith, and his estate reached out to us and said, we want this placed for research purposes and help inspire people for years to come. And that's exactly what we are here to do. But again, as my wife said, we don't know where to put a collection like that. Which one of the universities really wants or needs or specializes in pulp magazines? Because we've tried 5 places and everybody said no. But then Bowling Green seems to possibly want them, for example. But again, that might not happen. It may happen. It may transpire. We're still in talks with everybody. But being in a group with you folks and seeing your specialties, seeing your wants and needs, and getting this database going is actually something we were going to spearhead. But it's so great to see that you guys are on it.
It's already on it.
You guys are on it as well. So that's fantastic. We also have another collection from an artist and cartoonist named Scott Shaw, who worked on the Muppet Babies and Captain Carrot and all these amazing.
Did a lot of animals.
A lot of
animals.
and animation and things like that, Simpsons and whatnot. But he has a collection, not of those kind of comics, but just a standard one. Probably a lot of 90s comics, as you guys can, you guys were eloquently talking about. But no, he has stuff from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, that kind of stuff. And, it's a large collection in a warehouse, and he's not particular about where it goes. He just wants it to be, used for research purposes and for kids to read it, and it doesn't have to be, what do they call it when it goes into the regular library? Into circulation. Some things are good for circulation and other things are better for like a private reading room, obviously.
But you all know that.
But you guys know.
Well, can I ask you both a question? Because it sounds like this was the perfect meeting for you to come to, because we are talking about, how are different libraries that are collecting comics now, how are we specializing? What are our strengths? We have to decide what we're not going to collect, as you pointed out. But we are hoping to do this notable collection that I think would help you and the people you're working with a lot, because you could figure out who's collecting what at which institutions around the country, and maybe this is even around the world. So I think that would be really helpful. I'm curious to know if the people that you're working with, are they getting appraisals and are they donating and getting tax benefits, or does it just depend?
So what happened with University of Pennsylvania, he did want a large tax credit. He had to, we sent it all to University of Pennsylvania, and he had to hire an independent appraiser because we were too close to it. We would have been, it would have been collusion, I guess you would have called it.
Yeah.
So he did have to pay for an independent appraiser. Now, he is not independently appraising 5,000 comic books. Now, 50,000 comic books. He's appraising, a small chunk, which we went ahead and organized for him.
Yeah, basically, like, as you guys know, every collection is worth appraising, especially if it's of the 90s variety that you guys described. But this one was. I mean, this was the first appearance of of Spider-Man and Hulk and, you know, all the big key books, as we call them, from the early 60s on up. So the collection, even just the ones we sent to the university already, are already valued at over $500,000.
Wow.
And again, we do our own, I don't want to say appraisal, that's just not PC for us to say that, but we are cataloging everything in a database called Comic Base. It's a software that was developed by one of our own back in the day, you know, like a comic book guy, and it has every comic ever made, and it does list values based on current market trends. And so we say, okay, we have one copy of Amazing Spider-Man 428 in this condition, and it'll spit out a value. And then based on the spreadsheet that we send, it will give a total. But that is sort of an arbitrary total. So like
Right.
Andrew
It's
said,
not something that the IRS would accept.
correct.
Correct.
Even though, to
general
be
idea.
honest, even though we are absolutely 100% legit professionals and qualified to appraise and have appraised many, many things, like you said, it has to be a third party appraisal. So,
Yeah.
you know, there was somebody who helped with that collection. There's not a lot of other collections that we've dealt with thus far for appraisals. You know, I think Scott Shaw said he doesn't really care about that. Right. And obviously the Dennis Neal Smith, this is.
Well, the estate, I mean, we're just going to basically go through and say, okay, we have this many. Like, they don't even know how many books they have right now, and we have them all.
You still have to catalog.
So we still have to catalog them and you know, figure out condition, because it also came from San Diego, and they had huge floods, and so some of the books were destroyed in those floods.
And also has to do with the fact that, you know, two of the people, the collections we have, are still alive, and one is not. And so obviously the one that is not, is the estate, isn't really asking for any sort of tax. They
just want the donation letter saying, hey, we donated to them.
So if any librarians on this call might be interested, I think somebody put your website up. Is that correct? Do we have that? Yes.
It's comicartfoundation.org, comicartfoundation.org. So the collection is of pulp magazines, and, you know, it's like Amazing Stories and all those, you know, fantastical science fiction magazines. Some apparently predate the 1900s. One particular title I forget off the top of my head. So we haven't organized or cataloged it at this point.
But so if I understand correctly, that's what your foundation is doing. You're doing the organizing and the cataloging for the potential donor to help the donor and the institution that receives the materials. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we're
yes and no.
Yes and no. That's a really good point, Jenny. The first collection needed it. It warranted it. It was worth a lot of money, and it was a very large collection. It was in no organization whatsoever. It actually was chronological.
And he was a friend of ours, and you know, wanted to help him.
But there are these other collections, some of which we are going to organize, rebag and board and catalog, and some we're not. I mean, a lot of the universities, depending on where we place them, maybe are already set up for that and have their own internal staff that can facilitate that. And
or our own ways that we store them. We don't all store them in bags with bags and boards. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they needed to be in proper boxes. I mean, this pulp collection came in, Home Depot boxes. I mean, that's not just right off the bat, there's a problem, right? And in our, we can't wholeheartedly send these to a university for, safeguarding and, research and archival purposes in that manner. We wouldn't be doing our job. But just while we're on that subject, that's only one of the things that we are doing. That's only the initial kind of mission of our organization. Just so you know, we do have other aspirations, and we have board members as well. Some of you may or may not know Heidi McDonald. She is a reporter. She's from the Beat, used to be Comics Beat. She's a board member. Mark Andraco, who is a comic book creator, did a lot of work for DC Comics and Image and other things like that. Mike Malvey out of Arizona, who was a retailer for 25 years, who helped the Hero Initiative, another comic-based charity, for many years. He was on their board. And then we have also an associate board member. You guys may or may not be may or may not be familiar with, is Kevin Smith, the director, sometimes actor, funny guy, podcaster. Kevin Smith is one of our board members as well. Has done a really great job to help us out.
Yeah.
Yes, Mallrat. Yeah, that guy.
Right.
So
Yes,
I will,
Silent Bob.
because we're running out of time. I'm glad to hear about this foundation. This is really interesting because we get calls a lot about, with people with comics collections, comic book collections especially, and it seems like there could be, some ways to collaborate with you all and partner. And certainly the database that Mara talked about of notable collections, I think will be a good resource for you all. And I'll just add that if you have donors who are able to help with the costs of the collection, that can really make a huge difference. And I know all donors are different, and I don't know the financial circumstances of the foundation, but even just things like shipping, if costs can be covered, that can make a really big difference. And I know it seems counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, we're donating this, but it also, of course, requires a lot of resources on the part of the institution. So,
Yeah.
100.
Again,
Absolutely. We've come up against that. One other thing we just want to mention while we're here is we said we were eventually going to get into some other stuff. We want to do scholarships for people who want to write and draw comics, publish comics, but more importantly to our life, even be a comic book retailer. So people who want to open a comic book store who are, fans typically like to open comic book stores, but don't have business background. So we want to send people to business school first before you go and open a store, things like that. So, maybe get into preservation down the line or something like that, of the original art, of course. So yeah, we're really excited to be a part of this and present to you guys today. Thank you so much.
I can't type in the notes, but can someone type in, my email is comicartfoundation@gmail.com. And that will go directly to me and Ryan, and we hope to hear from all of you.
Yeah, and
we'd
I
love
don't know if
to.
you see the comments, but we can show you. Some people had suggestions for you in the comments, so we can be sure you get that. I think we're recording, so we can also.
Yes, I can't wait to be home to be able to watch this.
Yeah, I mean, we were in the car for 45 minutes in traffic, and we rushed here and put this on on our counter, on our back issue counter. So we did our best. We wish you could see you. We wish you could see us in our cool comic book store here in Los Angeles, but that's okay. We got Spider-Man right next to us, and R2-D2 up front. Come visit us if you're ever in LA. We'd love to meet everybody. So we do have a retail kind of for-profit store, and we have a nonprofit organization to help preserve and safeguard comic books for future generations. So that's what we're here for, and we would love to work with all of you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you both virtually, and definitely if I come to LA, I'll come and hopefully meet you in person. But we appreciate you making the extra effort to come here. So
thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. You take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
So I'll just mention that the Comic Studies Society's virtual conference is June 24th to the 28th, and it is all virtual. So hope a lot of people can attend. Our roundtable, which is being sponsored by the Research Librarians cohort, is called Accessing Comics, Body, Minds, and Disability in Graphic Narratives. It's a roundtable which is designed to bring a variety of perspectives on how libraries and librarians can connect readers with accessible comics non-visual comics, and multimodal comics, as well as graphic narratives about disability. So we haven't yet announced who our speakers will be, but that will be the topic, and we hope that everybody will be able to join us for what could be a really interesting conversation about how we can provide more access to people to the comics that we're collecting in our libraries. And then the last thing is we are going to be sending around some recommended bylaw amendments that our group has realized we might want to make some changes. We're a very new group. We modeled our bylaws on the the Comic Studies Society graduate student group. And there's just some things that we've learned in the year. A year is a really short amount of time to get stuff done. And so what we're proposing is some changes. We're proposing adding another member at large. So instead of 2 who are currently Jean Kannenberg and Rabar, who's not here with us today, we would actually have 3 members at large in addition to the officers, and that they would serve 2-year terms instead of 1-year terms, and that they would be elected in a staggering way so that one person's rolling off and a new person's coming on. Similarly, we're wanting to expand the secretary role to 2 years, and also have the president be able to stay on the executive committee 1 year after their presidency as an advisor, to again keep that continuity going. So those are the main changes. The other one is that we realize it's really hard to get 75% of our members together at one meeting. So we're proposing changing the language in how to change the bylaws to 50% plus 1 member, and giving some different options for how we can make those changes. And I think that was everything. Did I forget any of the changes we were proposing? Okay, so this is just to let everybody know this is coming. We're probably going to be sending out to the membership what those changes are to get any feedback, and then ask for an actual virtual vote. We'll be sending out a vote online. And we hope to get these in place before we do the elections for next year. Again, we just realized that 1 year is just not a lot of time, and people really felt like a 2-year term would be more productive for the organization. Anything else? Any questions for me or for the other officers? No? Okay. Well, thank you everybody who stuck it out. We appreciate you all being here, and we'll see you next time.